My job is to introduce to you Johnny Temple, who will be our moderator tonight. Johnny is a great friend to this institution. He's publisher and editor-in-chief of Akashic Books, an award-winning Brooklyn-based independent publishing company. He won the 2013 Ellery Queen Award and is the editor of the anthology USA Noir, which was selected as a New York Times Editor's Choice. He has taught courses on publishing at Wilkes University, at Wesleyan University, at Pratt, and he is the chair of the Brooklyn Book Festival Literary Council. And for those of you who don't know about the Brooklyn Book Festival, I hope Johnny might say a few words about it, but it is yet another organization that does incredibly important work that really shines a light on publishing and particularly celebrates independent publishers as well as some of the large publishers. We are a partner in that, and it's an incredible autumnal annual activity. Johnny is also a bass player in the band Girls Against Boys. He's toured extensively around the world. He's written lots and lots of articles about not only literature, but about, he's written political essays. He's written for The Nation, Publishers Weekly, Poets and Writers Book Forum, and on and on. So Johnny will be this evening in conversation with Dennis Johnson from Melville House, with Diane Wachtell, an old dear friend from the New Press, and Jamia Wilson from the Feminist Press at City University of New York. And with that, I welcome our panelists to the stage.
Good evening, everybody. It's great to see everyone here. Beautiful summer evening. As Deborah just said, I'm Johnny Temple from Akashic Books, and it's a real honor to be here and to be part of this program here at the beautiful Brooklyn Historical Society. As Deborah mentioned, I'm one of the organizers of the Brooklyn Book Festival, which for any of you who do not know about it, happens every mid-September every year, and this year will be our 13th year, and it'll be on, there's events for the whole week leading up to the Brooklyn Book Festival, and then the heart of the festival is the 15th, Saturday, September 15th, which is the Children's Day, and Sunday, September 16th, which is the main big day of the festival. And Brooklyn Historical Society has been a fantastic partner to the festival from the very beginning. They host incredible events here, and as I guess most of you know by now, they do really great programming year-round. And so we really appreciate the work of Deborah, Marcia, Bo, and the others here. So how about a round of applause for the Brooklyn Historical Society? So the program this evening, we're going to be talking a little bit about the political climate and what it means to be a progressive publishing company in politically volatile times. And I'm going to I've been introduced properly, but I'm going to let them self-introduce each other, starting with Dennis Johnson on the end from Melville House Press. I'd like it for each of you to just a couple of minutes talking about yourself and your press and the great work that you do.
Well, I was born at an early age. My wife, Valerie Marians, and I started Melville House right after the 9/11 attacks. It was a kind of an activist impulse from two people who had absolutely no experience in publishing. And I mean none. My wife is a sculptor, and I at the time was a freelance journalist and fiction writer. And even though I was a writer, I really didn't know shinola about publishing. So it was was kind of an accident. I had this book blog called Moby Lives, which I still have, and the day before 9/11, it had been declared Yahoo's website of the week. Remember Yahoo? The Google of their day. So I went from having about 4.5 readers to, I think, 30,000 or something the next day. And that was September 10th. And then on September 11th, my blog was kind of a live typing performance I did every morning, trying to get a bunch of news items up before 9 o'clock. And a lot of it was tip-driven. And so people were writing to me and saying, "Are you okay?" and stuff like that. And I was like, "You don't understand. I'm blogging, man. Site of the week." And so I kind of, one of my friends finally said, "Turn on your TV." I said, "You know I don't have a TV." He said, "Look out your fucking window." And I lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, right across from the World Trade. So that's how I found out what was going on. I'd heard the planes and everything and just didn't put two and two together. To cut a long story down into just a lengthy story, something people don't remember is that when the towers went down, New York was the largest broadcast marketplace in the United States at the time. Not a lot of people had cable. And all the broadcast towers were on the World Trade Center. So when they went down, there was no radio or TV, so we didn't really know what was going on. And we resorted back to the internet to find out. And through the course of the day on 9/11, people were sending me letters about what they went through. So I had a friend who was a poet, George Murray, great Canadian poet, and he was working for the New York State Department of Labor, which was at like 7 World Trade or something next door. And he wrote me an email late that afternoon about being told to evacuate his windowless office. And so they come downstairs, and the first thing he saw was an airplane tire at the door of the building, and then he had to run through all the jumpers. And then he was one of those guys running in front of the cloud. And so I started posting some of these testimonials, and the blog started getting a lot of attention for that. And then George Bush came to town and said, "You know, we got to go kill some people." And my wife was looking over my shoulder, and she just said, "You know, the stuff you're posting right now is more about what New Yorkers are going through than that. And we should do something with this stuff." So we collected it into a book, and we decided to collect the poetry that people had been sending. We had a friend who was the poet laureate of Queens, Dennis Nerksey, and some other really good poet friends. And we put this book together, and it just became more and more of a serious project. And at some point, we thought we were going to distribute it out of the backseat of the car at poetry readings. But it got more serious, and so we incorporated and started a business, and that book did really well. So I told my wife we were geniuses because we sold 15,000 copies of a poetry book. And we learned quickly that I was not a genius, but kept doing it because it was nice, and we felt like we could do something about the situation at the time. I mean, you know, we were obsessed with fighting George Bush, who looks like Winston Churchill in retrograde, but the company started with this idea of activism and books having a power that is really hard to describe, but that I think we all grant them. And feeling like you can have an influence with your books. And I'm not just talking about the nonfiction activist-y stuff. We did a book called What We Do Now, which we put together in just, 3 or 4 weeks after Trump got elected. We do a lot of stuff like that, but I feel like the fiction, we're pretty much a general trade publishing house. There's a lot, we publish a lot of novels, we publish cookbooks, for God's sake, and I feel like each one of them is part of the mission, that they are out to change the world and make it a better place. And let's see if Diane agrees with me about that.
Diane, this is Diane Wachtell from the New Press, which is a I'll let her tell the story, but it's a very interesting publishing company because while all the publishers represented here are mission-driven companies, the New Press is really deeply so, not to suggest that anyone else's is not deeply so, but the founding of it was built upon a really idealistic vision for what publishing can be. And I'd love to hear you talk about it a little bit.
Hi, everybody. And thank you to Deborah and Marcia for having us, and thank you all for coming out. It's interesting to hear Dennis talk about a particular kind of political origins for Melville House. The New Press has what I would call political origins, but actually they were more kind of like publishing industry politics.
Yeah.
The founder of the New Press, the guy whose idea it was a man named Andre Schifrin, who had for 30 years been the director of Pantheon Books, which was a very illustrious imprint at Random House. And over the years, the ownership of Random House had changed, and at a point in 1989, under the ownership at that time, it was decided that Pantheon wasn't profitable enough, that its politics were too far left. Some of you may actually remember there was a huge blowout. The entire editorial staff left. 300 people picketed Random House in the infamous lunch hour of rage. And Andre Schifrin decided to start a not-for-profit public interest book publisher. And he had many years of contacts in the funding community. He had sat on foundation boards and so forth. And he saw that the publishing industry was missing something that existed in broadcast media. So we had PBS and we had NPR, but we didn't really have that same vehicle for publishing the things that weren't necessarily going to be commercially successful, but that were intellectually important, or important for the ongoing national conversation about the issues we face. And we set up the New Press in 1990. We celebrated our 25th anniversary last year. And something that's interesting to me is that for our first decade or so, we talked about the New Press as filling a gap in the publishing landscape, and we talked about those kinds of publishing politics. But by the time we'd been around for a decade, it became clear that our mission was what was driving us, and the mission had partly to do with filling that gap, but it had come to be about using books to try to leverage social change. And that's the way we've talked about ourselves for the last 15 years. And it was kind of a de facto thing by the time we started to talk about it, but now it's just very intentional. We feel that, interestingly, if you have this object to hold up and wave, and we sometimes joke it could be blank inside, but if you have it, you get a media platform that you don't get without it. You get to write op-eds, you get to be on the radio, you get to opine, and so working in part together with foundations that have very specific programmatic goals in areas like education reform or criminal justice reform, so forth, we try to use our books to give tools to other not-for-profits to use in their reform work and their, in social movements.
And to my immediate left is Jamia Wilson, who is the publisher at Feminist Press, a really fantastic publishing company that has been doing groundbreaking work for a long time now. And one of my favorite things about Feminist Press is that you can really trace the different periods of the publishing company. And when we were talking backstage just a few minutes ago, it was interesting to hear you begin to talk a little bit about what you see as being your imprint on this revered, important publishing company.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Every day I wake up in the morning and I'm excited to be working for a press that helped raise me. I grew up on Feminist Press books. The Feminist Press is older than I am by a lot. And I think that is something that is a real opportunity and possibility that not everyone has the experience to have. So that was a challenge I wanted to take on for myself. I don't have a traditional publishing background. I'm an activist. I've been an organizer at a lot of different movement organizations. Today, when they were talking about the SCOTUS pick, I was looking back at pictures of myself as Planned Parenthood's campus organizer during the Bush years, thinking then that it could never get worse than this, and thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to change my frame and think, oh, I was trained for this moment. And so I feel really honored to be at the press at this time when we're 48 years old and we're looking at the horizon on our 50th birthday, and still thinking about the model that Florence Howe and all of the people who helped her found the press in 1971 had around imagining a press that could publish the risky work, the controversial work, the uncovered work that wasn't given its space in the canon because the people who wrote these works were women or people of color or both, or LGBTQ people. And so just having been someone who learned intersectional feminism in my household from my Black feminist mom, by getting books like I Love Myself, which was a Zora Neale Hurston book that was found by the Feminist Press and Alice Walker. And now I am going to get to have the privilege of working on that 50th anniversary edition of that book now as we're going into the 50th. So for me, I feel really enlivened to be a part of the press's life and history. And I think that the imprint that I hope to make, and I love the play on words that you have there, I just have to say, because I'm a nerd that way, the imprint, is that I hope to be what somebody wrote me the first day I started. And there was a woman who said she was one of the early contributors to the Feminist Press. And I think she was a woman of color, from what I could tell of this email, because I was the first woman of color and the youngest to become the publisher and director of the press. And she wrote this email saying, "You are the flower from which we planted the seeds. You are the dreams of your ancestors come true." And so what I'm hoping is that the work that other people planted the seeds for and bore beautiful flowers from, that I can help in creating a sustainability for that work, but also a new platform for a new generation to build upon it and to be inspired by that work in the way that I have been. So I'm hoping that just by having lived into so much of the movement building that's happened through my own activist work, working with other publishers as a writer and having experiences around, oh, that wasn't such a feminist or, anti-racist thing that I experienced. How can I make that not happen for people who interact with our publisher? Is something that I think a lot about. And we have an amazing staff that is super diverse and multi-generational, and we have a multi-generational board. And so on any day, I could be talking to people in their 20s about the books we're publishing and people in their late 90s about the books that we're publishing, and we're on the same page about the direction we should look at. Or if we're not on the same page, we want to find ways that we can publish different books in conversation about the issues that we haven't agreed upon as a movement, and acknowledge that that's okay. And so I just feel really excited about being able to be the midwife of these books at this time. And also, I see myself as an organizer too, someone who can help bring people to the table who wouldn't have seen a space for them in publishing before. Because if I were to be honest, I was always interested in publishing books. And I came from a middle-class background with professor parents. I had resources. But I remember when I wanted to go into either classics or publishing, when I was first looking at colleges, my mom said, "Oh, that's not a practical thing that you can really do. That's like something you could do if you have a trust fund or something like that." And so there's something about being in this role right now that is really enlivening me to think about how can I help make this industry more accessible for people who don't see themselves represented in it. And I think that the Feminist Press has a large history of doing that and being a part of that solution, but I want to broaden it more.
Great. Do you all think of your activities as working in your publishing companies as a form of activism, or is it an accompaniment to activism? Because when you think activism, of course, you think about people taking action, whereas running a publishing company, like so many other people, we're sitting in front of our computer screens all day, sending and receiving emails, reviewing documents, talking to people. And not to say that what activists do is always out on the streets. That's obviously not the case. But I'd be curious to hear what each of you all think. Do you feel like an activist in your current capacity? And do you want to be an activist?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I was raised by civil rights activists from South Carolina, so I feel like it was, it's in my blood memory to be doing this work. I mean, the fact that my grandfather was registering voters and, having to take ridiculous tests just to have a basic franchise, and to think that, I would not do everything within my power to protect that. It's just not going to happen. So I think of our work as very much activist work because we're always pushing back against the notion that we have to ask for permission to be included in a canon that is mostly white and male. I think that our work is activist work because we are publishing voices who otherwise wouldn't get the platform that we can help provide for them. And I think of our work as activist work because it's community building work. So we have a lot of people who buy directly from the Feminist Press because they believe in the movement around education and feminist education, amplifying feminist perspectives, and also the movement around connecting people through books and building empathy through books. So I very much feel that that's a part of why I'm attracted to this work. And then also just saying that because the industry, as I spoke about before, could use some diversity, I feel that every time that we are diversifying who's creating the object, we're talking about it, who's designing the covers, who's creating the typesetting even, all of that impacts the way in which more people see themselves presented in the work. And so I think that being is activism, even if it might not be the same as holding a rally. It's something that is disrupting a paradigm that isn't inclusive, and I think that's action.
Well, how about you, Diane?
I brought stuff. Yeah, I mean, I've been evidence. We did these fun posters about 5 minutes after the 2016 election, Fearless Books for Perilous Times. And I think we do see ourselves as activists. I mean, in different ways. We've always tried to do books that speak to issues, and to what we say is that we try to provide the intellectual scaffolding for movement work. We are not out in the trenches. We have a subsidiary mission, which is to diversify publishing, and so we're right there with you for 25 years on that, and that's a longer conversation. We can do a whole panel on that for sure. But I think that providing long-form texts that offer cogent, thoughtful, not half-baked formulations of arguments about social policy and so forth, and putting those out into the world is a form of activism, and that's, I think, the framework we work with.
The New Press is a nonprofit company, right?
We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we are not allowed to lobby, and we are not allowed to endorse political candidates, but we can do books on issue areas.
And Feminist Press is a not-for-profit.
Yes, we're also a C3.
But Melville House, I believe, is not. Like Akashic Books, I believe Melville House is a for-profit company.
De facto, if not de jure. I just want to take up that question for 1 minute, because I was sitting here trying to think of books that maybe exhibit a certain kind of activism more than other books. And there's different books do different things too. I mean, they give authors a platform, as we were mentioning before, to go on TV. If I'm able to book one of our authors on Lawrence O'Donnell, somebody may see that who will be inspired. These are the kinds of results you don't really know about. So there's all that kind of stuff going on. But also they have pamphleteering has a great history in this country, especially in the early days, the founding of the country. And I think about that a lot. I mean, they really were sitting around in Valley Forge reading Tom Paine. I mean, they really did that. And that really inspired those people. And so this country's kind of rooted in the power of the book in some ways. That book had a lot to do with the founding of this country. But take it up to today. So we're sitting around in the office at Melville House. I think it was December 9th. I can't remember if it's 2015 or 16, but the government, it was a Friday afternoon, about 5 o'clock, and the government released the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on torture. They didn't release all of it. They just released about 600 pages of it, of a 6,000-page document. It was a Friday afternoon. They put it out as a PDF that was barely readable and totally unsearchable. And then I guess everybody went home, and except the Melville House, because I said, Jesus, previously these government reports, somebody would always publish them. The most famous one is the 9/11 Commission report, which was an inside job with Norton Books. I don't know why it's a public document. That strikes me as illegal, but one of the senators on the committee was a Norton writer, but that's another story. I always wanted to do one of those kinds of books, the Starr Report, the 9/11 Commission report, you name it. Those are very interesting books to me. And so this one came along, and I realized, oh, none of the big boys are interested. None of the big houses are going to do it. It's Christmas time. It'd be hard to get into stores. Nobody had an early take on it because it wasn't clear that it was actually ever going to be released. So, I mean, if you read the 9/11 Commission report, that was typeset by Norton. They had it well before it was released to the public. But that wasn't going to happen this time. And they were trying to bury it like a bad press release. And so we stayed in the office until we had turned that PDF into a book. It took us 2 or 3 weeks. I forget exactly now. It was a blur. We stayed around the clock. It was an old warehouse building. The heat got turned off at 6 o'clock. It was in Dumbo, which even 2 years ago, there was no food after a certain hour. We had people working around the clock. I started live tweeting it because I was just a publisher sitting around, and next thing I know, the tweets are getting picked up, and we've got people volunteering to help us put this book together. It's a very difficult book to make technically because the CIA had redacted large segments of the book, just these black lines, and we wanted to replicate that because sometimes you can guess what got redacted just by the length of it. You can guess the word or the name. And as it turns out, there's no way to typeset a black line like that. So we had to figure out how the hell do you do that? And we were sitting around and we were like measuring character spaces and whatnot. And we had lots of great help from outside the company coming down to help us. And people started sending us food because I was complaining on Twitter that there's nothing to eat in Dumbo. And it was a hell of a project. But we got that book done, and we put it out not only as a print book, but importantly as a searchable PDF. And I saw that work come back to us when they were just, what was the woman's name? Who's the new head of the CIA? Thank you. She's featured in the book. And I started hearing from people about, thank you for having this out here for us. We sent that book, by the way, to every member of Congress and the Senate. And I feel like we did something really useful. I know Anthony Romero, the head of the ACLU, thanked me personally because he said they were burning out the printers in the office trying to print out copies from the government's PDF. So that to me felt like activism, and I got the whole staff to do it with me. I think they're happy and proud to do it too. It was really hard work. But at the end of the day, we were all slapping each other on the back because we felt we'd done something good for America. So that, yeah, I feel like an activist when I make a book.
I will round it out by saying, as a publisher, I don't feel like an activist. At Akashic Books, and by the way, I brought copies of our latest catalog if anyone is interested in grabbing one after the program. But the fight for racial justice, social justice underpins our company. The fight for the rights for, freedom for gay people, lesbians, transgender people. It's so core to what we do. However, I came into publishing I had a rock and roll background, and I still have rock and roll in my life a little bit, but one of the things I didn't like about being in a rock and roll band was being so my life was so narrow, and we would play benefit concerts and do other types of political engagement, but having rock and roll be sort of your identity 24/7 was just a bit much for me. And one of the things I really loved about publishing when I got into it is the incredible range of books that you can publish. And I like being able to publish, while we publish lots of books that are, like I say, all about racial justice and other important social justice issues, like this former NBA player, Etan Thomas, wrote this incredible book called We Matter, Athletes and Activism. But I also love the liberty of being able to publish a weird, esoteric, nihilistic novel that arguably does not make the world a better place. I love that. So I'm just saying, and one of my favorite authors early on, these days he's come to his senses, but one of my very favorite authors early on was someone, came from a Republican background and voted for Republican politicians and all this kind of stuff. He's a wonderful, wonderful person. I have a question for you all. If you read a great novel by someone who you go to their social media and you can see that they are a Trump supporter, I won't go so far as to say they're like an activist Trump supporter, but if you read a great novel that fit your publishing program, or maybe it wouldn't, maybe by definition it wouldn't fit your publishing program, but so let's just say a great novel that is not about politics, but still manages to fit your program, how would you feel about publishing it?
I feel like there's so many nuanced questions I would want to ask. I mean, in my personal practice and life, I try to get curious when I feel visceral, right?
Yeah.
So I think what I would want to know, I'm like, oh, are those tweets attacking? Are they promoting hate speech? What does it mean?
Right. Why do you support Trump?
Why do you support him? I want to get to the marrow of it. But I do think, one of the things that came to my mind was a lesson that I got from one of our authors in the publishing of this book, Radical Reproductive Justice, which we've actually talked about here in this space. And Loretta Ross, who is one of the mothers of the reproductive justice movement and is one of the editors of this book, was talking about how the reproductive justice framework is steeped in human rights. And that if you can argue a human rights framework and still present a pro-life argument, and I worked for Planned Parenthood, so I have an opinion on this, that story should be included in this narrative in addition to birth justice narratives. And so when we were looking at the final edit of this book and that article that was written by this woman from Feminist for Life, as I always say, Feminist for Life, Loretta said, no, you need to honor that this story that she added here adheres to the human rights framework that is integral to reproductive justice. And when I sat and read it, and I suspended my first judgment, as Dr. King would have taught us to do, I saw, even though I disagreed with certain alternative facts in the piece, that in fact, the human rights framework there was arguing a lot of things that I couldn't disagree with on the issues that we cared about in a mission-based standpoint around birth justice, childcare, supporting other parts of a parenting person's journey. And so we haven't directly had that situation or that scenario, but I do think we're always kind of coming up against these sort of nuanced questions where we do need to get curious. Another example I'll just give of it quickly is that we have books in our catalog, sometimes around the same time they're published, that have vastly different views about sex work specifically, which is a long-term conversation in the feminist movement around even the use of that word as describing trafficking and sex work, et cetera, as different things or the same thing, or depending on who the author is, they're going to have a different point of view. And what I think attracted me to the job at Feminist Press when I was looking at the catalog was that it's representing feminisms that can have space for a variety of viewpoints. Now, if those viewpoints are harming people, if those viewpoints aren't fitting our agenda or mission, that's a different thing. But I do think that the nuanced piece is really important.
Why did every head turn to me? Now, I haven't known you people very long, but what do you think? What do you think my answer to this is? Life is too short. This reminds me of a Johnny Temple anecdote. Once upon a time, Johnny and I have done a good number of panels together over the years, and we're usually battling each other to be the latest person on the panel. And once Valerie and I were going to meet Johnny, we live in the same neighborhood, for a beer and just talk over publishing stuff, which we do periodically. And I can't remember which one of us was latest, but we were both really late getting there. And we were both really late for the same reason, which was an author who was being difficult. And when you're a little company, an unhappy author can shut you down. They can just shut you down. And so we were swapping stories about this, and Johnny revealed that he has a sniff test. Now, I don't think I'm giving away anything confidential here, but just that, we evaluate the authors for more than just like how good is the book, but how are they to work with? Because what we do, I think, is really good for the author. We're really trying to promote the author. That's what it's all about. And if we like the author and they work well with us, we'll do another book with them, and we will really help them with their career and as I said before, help them get a platform. And I'm not giving anybody who voted for Trump a platform. I'm just not going to go there. That's not what the company's about. I don't understand those people. I don't want to promote their interests. I don't want to share a platform with them. It's pretty simple, really. You put making a book is so hard. You gotta really believe in the author, really believe in them.
So is the struggle, and this is not what you're saying, but I'm going to extrapolate in a direction you weren't probably intending to go, but I find that in this day and age, the left is often wants to struggle for justice without engaging with the right, because the right people are too reprehensible. Someone voted for Trump, you're saying disqualifies them from being published by your program, no matter what their values are. As Jamia says, certainly there's many pro-life, to use a shortcut word, feminists, people, women that would have a human rights underpinning for their own belief system. So are you not interested in engaging? And I know that's not what you were saying, but I'm going to put you on the hot seat.
Not with everybody. We're at an extreme moment. We're really on the verge of fascism. I think the last election, if you didn't vote for Hillary Clinton, I don't get you. And it's not because I love Hillary Clinton. I don't really like Hillary Clinton. But we had a choice, fascist or not fascist. To me, it's as simple as that. Even George W. Bush wasn't quite that kind of choice. So I think there are extremes. There are extremes, and I'm not interested in doing anything at all to promote those extremes. I do see my job is to fight them, in fact. So that would be really contradictory to everything inside. That said, I think if you look at our list, we're obviously interested in a lot of different kinds of viewpoints, and I don't necessarily agree 100% with everybody we publish. I'm interested in making interesting books that is part of the mission, which is to express a wide variety of wide shades of any ism. But I do think this is such an extreme moment. It calls for sometimes an extreme, what's the word? Stance, refusal, resistance. Yeah.
Righteousness.
Okay, you asked about fiction very specifically.
Yes.
So I'm going to just duck this question very elegantly because the New Press doesn't publish American fiction. So we would never be in the position of having to evaluate that. That said, I'll back up and say I was a comparative literature major in college. For my first 5 years in publishing, I did only very beautiful fiction from around the world. My family thinks I was apolitical, so my family thinks it is a great cosmic joke that I run a political publishing house. But I was thinking, I mean, it's an interesting question. We do a small amount of literary fiction from around the world. It's probably 5% of our list. It is what I would call A-plus fiction. That is to say, those writers write better than we do. We don't edit them because they don't need us to edit them. They're really primo. Our kind of litmus test is, will people still be reading them 50 years from now? And the idea is to bring to America voices that we wouldn't ordinarily hear. I mean, Americans, forgive me, but we're fairly xenophobic, and the publishing houses, it's expensive to translate stuff, and it's hard. It's hard to evaluate things in foreign languages, and you get confused, like, just because I can understand it, is it good? Those are different things, and it takes a while to figure that out. So would I publish fiction by someone whose politics were bad? Yeah, I probably have. I mean, I think I actually don't know the politics of everyone we publish. And we all can think of musicians who have written, or composers who have written incredible things and had terrible politics. And I think Mario Vargas Llosa had some not so great politics, but we still read them. So it's a tough question. I'm not going to answer about Trump.
I have a question, Bo, about time. Our schedule is to take some questions from the audience at around 7:30. Is that the plan?
Yeah, about 10 minutes.
Okay. So I think we probably only have time for one more question from me before we turn to the audience for some questions. And I want to touch upon something that we've discussed in passing briefly, but the issues of, Jamia, you've spoken the most about this, but I'm also curious to hear from Diane, the New Press's approach to trying to make the publishing business a little bit less blindingly white than it is. And I know that this has been important and foundational for the New Press. So I'd be curious to hear you talk about that, and then we'll take it from there.
Sure, thank you. So a big part of what the New Press was set up to do was to bring different voices into the public conversation. And that has to do with finding authors who are not your typical, mainstream commercial authors, but it starts at home, and it starts with, as Jamia said, not just the people acquiring the books, but the people designing them, the people producing them, the people promoting them. So when the New Press first started, we were intent on having an incredibly diverse staff, an incredibly diverse board of directors. We did have a minority-majority board for many, many years. I don't think it is right this minute, but it sometimes is. Something that I learned, though, or that we figured out initially was it was not going to be a service to anyone to go around the industry and say, oh, look, there's a person of color running a production department, let's bring them to the New Press. In fact, that was going to be counterproductive. Like, there's a little bit of diversity in mainstream publishing, not a lot. And we came to see that what we could do, I think, most effectively was to bring in new, young people to the industry, many of whom maybe wouldn't have considered the industry before, in the way you said, that it just didn't seem like a career that was viable for a lot of people. And we went to the Kellogg Foundation. We got a very nice grant and started an internship program. The grant ran out 23 years ago, and we've kept the internship program going. I think we've put 700 or 800 young people through it now. Many, many, many of them are in publishing or in not-for-profit careers. A whole bunch of them stayed on and are at the New Press. We are one of the more diverse presses out there. Something that's kind of sad to me is Calvin Reed at Publishers Weekly wrote us up as the most diverse press on the planet when we first launched, and then and there's kind of an iconic picture of 14 of us on the roof of our CUNY office building, and we were very, very diverse. And 10 years later, on our 10th anniversary, he wrote the same article about us. And 25 years later, on our 25th anniversary, he wrote the same article about us, and not a lot felt like it had changed around us. So, at some level, I feel like we haven't succeeded, but we try. Mm-hmm.
I think that one of the shortcomings I would say about liberalism in general, and as reflected in the publishing business, which is a very liberal business, is this idea treating ethnic diversity as almost like from a charity mindset, like, oh, these poor underprivileged people, whereas it seems very clear to me, and Jamia, I'd be curious to hear what you think of this, that it's not actually about charity or even necessarily doing good work, although doing good work is an important part of it. To me, it's about excellence, actually, and doing the best possible work that you can do, the most interesting work, the deepest work, the most nuanced work. And what we're talking about is not just the authors being published, but as Diane is talking about, is actually the people working in the business and the importance of that. But I'm always trying to sort of reframe the question less around justice and more around excellence, because I really do think if this business, which a lot of people on the other side of the river in New York, the big companies like to bemoan, oh, no one's reading anymore, no one's buying books. But a lot of that is because we as a publishing industry sell books to other just really, it's a really narrow demographic that we're trying to sell books to. And I think it could be a much livelier, healthier business if we just broaden our horizons a little bit. So I'm curious to know what your sort of approach is towards this question.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about excellence, because we've been in conversations around strategic planning, and organizational excellence is a conversation that happens a lot, and this is a part of that conversation. I mean, I personally notice from my own personal tastes that the music I listen to, the books that I read, that come from diverse viewpoints, lots of different ideas converging, and friction sometimes even there ends up producing better work. So I would say that I agree with you. I also think that the staff that we have right now, and we're continuing to want to strengthen that even more, reflects the community that reads our books. So, and the people who are writing our books, and those people are very diverse. They are all different backgrounds racially, they are disabled, they are trans, they are queer, and they are from all over the world because we publish globally as well. And so it's really important to us to also have editorial staff and other people there who can understand nuance within the books, and if they don't necessarily have that from their personal experience, be able to ask the right questions, to be more generative and not oppressive. Because I, having been edited by other people, have experienced the opposite of that. When people will say, oh, maybe you could tone down that thing you said about white supremacy because it'll make white people uncomfortable. That's been said to me about an editor in a post-Trump era, by an editor. And I've kind of said, oh no, I'm leaving that right in, because it's really important. And so what I love about where we are is that our team is always ready to dig in and to go into those questions. This book here, La Bastarda, which is one of my favorite books that we have right now, is a really beautiful piece of fiction. It's a translation, and it's the first translation by a woman from Equatorial Guinea into English. And it's about a queer Equatorial Guinean protagonist. And it's a beautiful story and one of those page-turning reads. But what's really great about it is you can also learn about what it means to live your life in an authoritarian regime that's different than ours. And I feel that when it was being edited, when our wonderful senior editor, Lauren Hook, was editing it, she took the time to ask me about hair braiding and the nuance of how to talk about that, and how someone with my texture of hair would talk about it so that she could find the right words in English and Spanish, even though she spoke Spanish, to make sure that it honored the intention of the author. And I was thinking, this is why we need to have a team like this, for us to be able to get it as close to right as possible, to be able to have these questions and to have the books reflect the integrity of the beautiful subject matter that we get to hold.
Great. I think we're out of time for me to be asking questions, but we do have time for you all to be asking questions. So we have a microphone, so please speak into the microphone when you ask your questions, since we're being recorded.
Hi. So each of you separately spoke about how you want to use your books to create social change. And I'm just wondering, how do you go about creating those communities to maybe bring in new people or to build on the change that you're trying to make?
That's a good question.
So try, just.
You're
clarify
wondering
your
how
point,
we
Jonathan.
build communities? How do we build new readers, basically?
Make your community stronger or expand it through your books.
Got it.
I'm not sure this is going to be responsive, so just like go like that if it's not. But the New Press has several people. As a not-for-profit with a social mission, we actually have people on staff who do things that are not just about selling books, that are non-revenue generating. And a couple of different people work on what we call our partnerships. And that has to do with forming ongoing relationships with other not-for-profits who are doing work in the fields where our books are being published, and working with them to figure out how to get the word out, build bigger audiences, reach their constituents, and so forth. Is that what you're getting at? So that's a big tool for us, is the partnerships work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of us too, you know, the consciousness raising work, right, through collaboration, but also engagement. So often if there's actions that people are doing, so with the Me Too rally in March, we were there, I had our book, I Still Believe Anita Hill, and we were organizing people and giving them the toolbox for the resistance, which we, you know, have in our books. And with the events that we do all across the country, we always try to make those as accessible as possible to all the different people who want to access them, and to partner with organizations that are doing work that aligns with our mission. And sometimes organizations who might not be the people would expect us to work with, but to find ways that we can bring our different communities together who we think would have similar interests. This book here, Go Home, is an example of that, which is a really, really beautiful anthology of Asian diasporic writers. And we have people whose names that you might know in the book, and then other people who might be emerging writers as well. But this book that was edited by Jisoo Kim on our staff was actually a partnership with the Asian American Writers Workshop, who we love to partner with as well. And there was a lot of partnership happening with other organizations who were bringing in other communities. And so I think that the books are also, like you said, it was a tool, you know, to be able to get a platform or a calling card or dance card. I think a lot of times too, it can be our dance card to ask other people to play with us, who we want to work with and build with, because we like and support their mission.
I'll just say, this is a good question. And this is basically what your marketing department does. We live in a wonderful time in a lot of ways. I can't believe I just said that, but we actually do in terms of social media. When Valerie and I started Melville House, it's been 17 or 18 years now, you basically did the same thing for every book. You made up a media hit list and you put the book in an envelope and you mailed it out and you hope for the best. Now you have to, there's a different campaign for every book. There's different things to do, not just publicity, but social media has really changed the world, and it's one way that little publishers like us can out-juke the big houses. You know, my team working Twitter can say things that the Random House team working Twitter has to, you know, run through a program of permissions to say. So we can be much quicker, much more agile, and you can finally see, I think forever, people in the book business have talked about the thing that sells a book is word of mouth. You can see the word of mouth now. You can actually see it and participate in it. And that's how you get to more people. So when we sit down, we've got a new book. How do we get this to the converted? But we want to do more than preach to the converted. How do we get it beyond the natural audience for that book? Well, maybe we target a Facebook ad campaign. Maybe we target a Google campaign that kind of stretches the boundaries of the audience. It helps us get to people who we think may be more susceptible. And that stuff can get really granular. it can get really granular. But it really does open the world up for finding ways to participate in the word of mouth on a book or a subject, and not be limited to just publicity, because there are fewer and fewer media outlets talking about books. I'm sure you've all noticed this. There are certainly fewer reviews and things like that. But just, who talks about books on television? If it isn't like a political talk show talking about campaign books, or a morning show doing a cookbook, where do you go? It's not on the talk shows that much anymore, or anywhere else. So there are ways to compensate for that, and there are ways that may actually give small publishers an advantage over the big houses, which really do control the marketplace. I mean, that's the problem we all face. The big five sell 50% of the books in this country, but they control 100% of the marketplace, all the big retailers and the big publishers, and we have to play in their marketplace. And that's one way that we can really do it and grow the readership and let a lot of people who don't know about what we're doing hear about it.
I just want to add in one more thing, something that we've done at Akashic, which is we publish a lot of Caribbean authors. We publish a lot of Jamaican writers, Trinidadian writers, Haitian writers, and we're very involved in that region. And so one of the problems that publishing faces in the Caribbean is that almost all of the writers who start to have success leave the region. Almost all the Caribbean writers that the people in this room probably know about, almost all of them live in the United States, Canada, or the UK, and a smattering of other places, but very few of them actually still live in the Caribbean. But of course, there's lots of book-loving people in the Caribbean, and there's lots of great writers, emerging writers in the Caribbean. But it's really been difficult for people to start publishing programs in the Caribbean for various reasons. Not just that, the average Jamaican writer who starts to have some success is very unlikely to publish their book with a Jamaican-based publishing company for a whole host of reasons. One of the reasons is that it's more expensive for a Jamaican publisher to print their books in Jamaica than it's cheaper for them to print them in the United States and then pay the big shipping bill to get their books. So there's lots of reasons, social, economic, etc., why it's hard on Caribbean publishing companies to get started. And there's very, very few literary Caribbean-based publishing companies. You'll have textbook publishers and academic publishers, but in terms of literature, there's more broadly speaking, there's very few. So one of the things that we've done in terms of community building is using the advantages that we have as an American-based company, and we have teamed up with a wonderful British publishing company called Feminist Press. And they publish, their mission is to publish Black British writers and Caribbean writers. And so together, I would say that Feminist and Akashic, outside of the Caribbean, are sort of the two leading publishers of Caribbean fiction, I would say. There's lots of publishing companies that publish Caribbean writers, but in terms of an actual focus. So Feminist and Akashic, when I talk about it, it sounds a little patriarchal, but the fact is we do have these advantages, and so we have been helping to foster and build publishing companies based in the Caribbean that sort of we would help to get started and then pull ourselves out of, and thereby help to nurture a much healthier publishing climate in the Caribbean, and thus leading to readers having more access, to books and things being locally sourced, whether it's the designers, the typesetters, whoever, the editors, et cetera, but so that every time you buy a book by Marlon James, Marlon James is a great Jamaican writer, but chances are the person who typeset the book, the person who designed the book cover all the way through are non-Caribbean people. And so that's one of the things that we've done. And I think that one of the things reflected, I love the answers. Thank you for the question, and I'm sorry that I'm going on and on. But the answers do reflect the creativity that we as people in the publishing business, there's so many different points of attack for us and engagement. It's one of the great things about being in the business.
Michael White, Citizens Defending Libraries. By the way, I want to thank Melville House for publishing Scott Sherman's Patience and Fortitude about the selling off of the libraries. I'm wondering about where your attention is attracted to, in particular, in terms of the structural changes that need to be made to restore democracy in the country, and maybe particularly in terms of the voices that are most likely to be censored. You are actually a structural, you're a structural fix for the fact that the media is ignoring so much, but we pay a lot of attention to the voices that people, publishers are sometimes don't even, stop the publication of their own book. So what, the structural changes, like for instance, the elimination of the duopoly, the lock of the duopoly, the money in politics, etc., the structural changes we need to restore democracy.
What are we doing to restore democracy, in a nutshell?
Specific titles, book publishing,
And themes,
and themes. Well, all of the above, for sure. I mean, we just did a terrific book by Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island, called Captured, that's about the regulatory capture and money in politics. We're certainly always doing books about voting rights and the whole panoply of issues that are about restoring our democracy. We have a couple of, I brought a couple to show you. We have this one coming, American Hate, that is about mostly immigrant populations who have been targeted, and obviously, something that we think should inform public debate on that topic, which is extremely important right now. Not a Crime to Be Poor is about the criminalization of poverty in America today and all the various policies we have in place. Rules for Resistance is advice from people who have lived under autocracies around the world for Americans about how to recognize it and what to do about it. And actually this book has at the end, I'm sure you've all heard about the indivisible groups that have sprung up. This is the only place you can get in print the indivisible manifesto that they came out with early on. Decarcerating America is all kinds of ideas from a range of people about how to bring down mass incarceration. People Like Us is about diversifying the people who are running for public office. We're getting to the end here.
It's a bottomless bag.
It's a bottomless
There's no bottom to that bag.
It's like I'm Mary Poppins, actually. Brown is the new white is about the fact that we actually have a progressive majority in the country. We just have to get them to vote. And finally, In a Day's Work is about the Me Too movement and all the women who are left out of the Me Too movement and the people who have been left out of our policies, agricultural workers, domestic workers, hotel cleaners, and so forth. So we're trying. If you've got topics, if you got topics you think we should be publishing on, I'd love to hear. I mean, we're all ears. That was fun.
And I just want to say, just from the books that you put out there, so Sayub Adjwani, whose book is here, People Like Us, about this new wave of candidates that are knocking on democracy's door. I've done some work with them and had a chance to work with her, and they are doing amazing work. When you think about that wave that just shook the media here in New York recently, we're talking about what happened in Queens, for example, they were directly connected to that work. So I also want to just speak to the fact that I'm seeing through these books communities that you are mobilizing and amplifying the voices of those communities who are doing really tactical structural work every day, which I think is really important.
Thank you. I take her everywhere.
I think it's amazing. And I think, that's one of the things, we talked about this on the phone but when we were all connecting, but what I really enjoy coming from an organizing world into indie publishing specifically is that I'm seeing a lot of collaboration and camaraderie that I think is really important because we are in this together. And when you all win, we win, right? And so I think that that's really important. But I also had a couple of things in my bag of books. It's making me think of Binders Full of Women for some reason right now. Like, this is our answer to that. But I just wanted to say that, you know, one of the things that I feel really proud of is that we are publishing a lot of immigrant authors. And that's something that's always been a part of Feminist Press's list and mission. But right now, we're really doubling down, and we have a lot of women of color authors, specifically who are immigrants, who were publishing from Puerto Rican diaspora to YZ Chen, who is the winner of our Louise Merriweather Book Prize, who wrote about authoritarian regimes in this beautiful piece of fiction, Though I Get Home, about Malaysia, which is where YZ is from. Thank you so much. And then I also wanted to share that this book, Your Art Will Save Your Life, which is kind of a really great bite-sized read by Beth Pickens, is about how artists can use their creativity now to take action. And I think, you know, we talk about the structural issues a lot, but I think that this book is extremely important. It's been doing really well for us ever since it came out. It's already in its next reprinting. We just put it out in April. But, you know, I have a jazz musician husband who loves what I do and he supports the mission. But this was the first book that he just grabbed out of my bag one day and devoured. And I had to fight to get it back. And just hearing the things that he said spoke to him from this book about what he could do as an artist, how he could mobilize in a time when arts funding is being cut, in a time when he felt like, you know, I don't know what my talents can do to help end this tyranny, to be able to point him to a guidebook that really talks about how artists too can tap into some real tangible results in addition to helping us all engage in joyful defiance. So I just wanted to share that I think that there's a lot of ways that just having these books out here that are supporting the communities that are also pushing back at these structural oppressions are really important in amplifying those voices.
Do you have anything to add?
I didn't bring enough books, clearly. I think the question's been answered.
All right. I think this is probably our last question, unless someone insists on asking us another question after this.
Hi there. Oh, sorry. So Jamia, you mentioned briefly just about publishing overseas, and I was thinking about countries that actually have active censorship so you can look at China, and now even more and more you can look at Hong Kong, and I'm wondering if any of you take any specific action or do anything specifically in order to try to get books that you might think might be censored over there anyways, in order to try to, because clearly they're being censored for a reason, in order to try to enact some sort of change or get the books in the hands of the right people.
So are you asking, do we work to get our books to the right people or to acquire those books from people who are being censored in their...
Like as publishing houses, do you work to say, you know, a book that needs to be, say, in Hong Kong, get to Hong Kong?
Got it.
Say the end of it. As publishing houses, do we work to get books?
There are books that really are being censored actively, that really should be not censored because they are damaging to, say, an authoritarian regime.
Got it.
Like, do you as publishing houses recognize that and make a special effort in order to get those books into those regions?
I would say autocracies are pretty good at what they do. I mean, when we try to get books into China that the Chinese government doesn't like, they censor them, and either they won't sell them at all, or they arrest the people who sell them, or they make the publishing houses take out the passages that are offensive to the government. We have not successfully, to my knowledge, we did a book called Blocked on Weibo that was about everything that is censored on the web in China, but no, we have not successfully done that.
It's more our job to talk to, you know, we're publishing in English, and I don't know what good we're going to be doing sending books into China, you know?
Well, typically, we would sell rights. We wouldn't, we publish our books in the English-speaking parts of the world, and then we sell translation rights elsewhere. So it would take a very brave publisher under an autocratic regime to buy the rights, and they would be the ones at risk. Yeah.
And I guess one thing I would want to say, just having grown up in a regime, so I'm American, but I grew up in Saudi Arabia as an expat. Never thought I would see women driving in my lifetime ever, which is a whole other story. But one of the things, and people found all sorts of ways to get books into the kingdom. And so I also kind of learned the value of reading a juicy contraband book, which is very good when you're in a situation like that. But one of the things I think that we do play an important role in doing is, if we can publish a book that would be banned elsewhere in a regime where someone's living with blocks to their free expression, the public outcry here, the consciousness raising here about what's happening there can sometimes add protection for people in spaces there because the governments don't want to have that kind of attention. It can sometimes also add harm depending on the context, but I also have experience with just seeing that, and also we have a book called Beijing Comrades that was published by the Feminist Press that was very controversial, and it was a Chinese censored book as well. And so, I'm always thinking about that for our translation program. Right now I'm really interested in stories from Yemen and Saudi Arabia, North Korea, mainly because I also have a fascination with that, but there's other people on the team who are really excited about it too, because we do understand the power of what it means to have those stories amplified in other places. Growing up, my parents, who grew up in Jim Crow and were involved in civil rights, told me about what it meant to go to other places and have people say, oh, I watched on TV what it was like for you and your family to be hosed by water hoses, and to see how that was impacting politics in their community in South Carolina. And so I think less so than maybe getting the books there, I'm really interested in what we can do here when we can acquire those books for people and help create public outcry that can build awareness and build movements for freedom.
Actually, you just reminded me of a book that we published under George Bush that I really enjoyed publishing, called Literature from the Axis of Evil. And we we did it with Words Without Borders. We had to consult with attorneys because all of the countries we were publishing from, the State Department had embargoed, and we weren't allowed to give them anything of value, and was publishing their work even without paying, but giving them something of value is very interesting. But so we felt like we were thumbing our nose. Yeah.
All right, I think that wraps up the program. So I want to thank these wonderful three panelists and the Brooklyn Historical Society.
Thank you.